Welcome to episode 462 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Meyers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today, I am interviewing screenwriter Jennifer Dornbush. She is a screenwriter with a background in forensics. She's written in the crime genre and has actually written a book called Forensic Speak: How to Write Realistic Crime Dramas. So we talk about her own writing career, but also dig into some very practical tips for screenwriters who want to make their crime writing a little more authentic. So stay tuned for that interview. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or Facebook. These social media shows really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mentioned in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode number 462. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay for 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell a screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline and career letter, and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I am interviewing screenwriter Jennifer Dornbush. Here is the interview. Welcome, Jennifer, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Thank you, Ashley. It's good to be here.
It is good to have you here. So to start out, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up and how did you get interested in the entertainment industry and specifically forensics?
Sure. Okay. I'll try to do it really fast. Because it's a long circuitous road. But I was born in Western Michigan in a small rural community, and I was a writer since I was a kid. I was that kid who would write little plays and then force my sisters and the neighborhood kids to, play the parts. So when I, grew up and left town and went to Chicago for college, I studied literature. I studied rhetoric. I actually went out to LA for an internship because I knew that I wanted to write in, write for the masses, so to speak, but I had no idea what that looks like. So I got this opportunity to do an internship in LA. And that was a long time ago when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And it just, I didn't feel it. I kind of ran from my calling for about 10 years and went back to Chicago, did lots of other wonderful things, worked in journalism and public relations, taught high school, taught college, moved around a bit. And then I found out about an amazing program called Act One, Writing for Hollywood. And it was exactly what I had been looking for. So on the, cusp of 30, when everybody's like, what am I doing with my life? I was like, yeah, what am I doing with my life? I wanted to write. I need to do that. So I went through the program and it changed my life. It completely turned my trajectory. And my husband and I moved to LA so that we could really immerse ourselves in the industry, and I could really start taking it seriously. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Okay, perfect. So just go back for a second. What was the name of that program, and is it still around? Is it something people can still go and check out?
It is still around. It's called Act One, Writing for Hollywood. And they run summer programs specifically for, adult learners who, have jobs and, need to work while they're also. And it's all taught, it's very hands-on, it's all taught by industry professionals. So it's not just, your professors who are, these are people who still working very actively and successfully in the industry. So.
Gotcha. I'm curious too. I'd be just to hear your thoughts on working in PR, working in journalism. Obviously, you're writing a lot. It's not necessarily creative writing, but you are writing. And one thing I've definitely noticed, I sell a number of services to screenwriters, a blast service and this. And one of the things I really try and tell people is the people that have had the success with my services, truthfully, they come from either a writing background, journalism, PR, or they come from an entertainment industry. It's very unusual. I'm not saying it's never happened, but it's very unusual unusual that someone just uses my blast service, gets an option, sells a script. People have done that, but generally when you look at their background, there's quite a bit behind them. It's not just sort of a one-off thing. And I'm curious, how do you look back on now as you're moving into screenwriting and writing scripts, that journalism and PR background? It's concise writing, this real, thoughtful. And so there's a lot of parallels, but just what are your thoughts on that as a background?
Wow, that's so interesting, Ashley. I've never heard anybody say that, but I guess it makes a lot of sense. Even when I look around at the people I know who've had success. So I was a storyteller, right? So if you're a journalist or you're working in public relations or marketing, you're telling the story of that company, or you're telling, and obviously journalism, it's storytelling. It's just storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
So I think everything I did, built on, I feel like nothing that we do in our life is ever wasted. And all those years of training, all those years of having to interview people and come, go do quick deadlines and write succinctly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Write very descriptively and succinctly. And then even like PR marketing is really helpful when you're trying to sell your work.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's all helped me. It's none of it was wasted. And
yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, I'm a storyteller. So
perfect.
Whether I'm telling a business story or.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just briefly, let's talk about your first feature film credit, God Bless the Broken Road. Again, just quickly, how did you ultimately get involved with this project? How did you get it sold?
Right. It's a funny story because I'm mostly a crime writer and mostly in that genre. But I had met this guy. We had worked together at a production company, and he's a director, and we just became friends. We're from the same area in Michigan, and we just really clicked. And fast forward, I don't know how many years, he called me up and said, "Hey, I have this idea for this film. Do you want to write it?" And honestly, that's how it happened. So it was not a genre that I had really written in before, because it's more of like inspirational, very heartwarming genre. Not that crime isn't heartwarming, but it was a very different genre. And so yeah, we sat down and we wrote it, and it got produced. Yeah.
So again, give me your perspective as someone who moved to LA. Do you think a project like this ever would have worked if you were not living in LA? And just talk about some of that. Do you think it's in this day and age? I mean, we're doing this via Zoom, so definitely you can do things now very remotely. It's very standard. But do you think that's the right move for someone who wants to be a screenwriter? Now that you've made the move to LA, what are your thoughts on that?
Right. It's so interesting because part of me doesn't know anymore because of the way COVID has changed the world and how we work. I know when I landed there many, many years ago, it was absolutely essential, and and I never would have met this director had I not moved there. And he actually only moved there for a short time too. He went back to Michigan, but I do think everything is done by relationship. And so there's never been a time where I've gotten a job that it did not involve a relationship I had built. And most of those, if not all of those, probably, I think almost all of those, if I think about it, were built in Los Angeles. I don't know. I feel like the jury is still out yet on what the landscape is now, because you're right. Everything I do now is via Zoom. Relationships I'm building now and people I'm working with now, we've never actually met in person, and seems to be working, but
so
I don't know.
I agree with you on
everybody's thoughts on this.
No, I agree. I think the jury is still out on that. So let's dig into your book, Forensic Speak: How to Write Realistic Crime Drama. Maybe to start out, just tell us, what is sort of the gist of this book? What is this book all about?
So I grew up in a forensic home. My father was a medical examiner, and the office was in our house. So I was really exposed to this forensic crime type of world really since I was a kid, very, very young. And it was, we learned a lot sort of at the kitchen table, maybe too much for young children. That's up for a psychologist to debate. But when I started to connect my writing to my life, I realized I knew all this stuff. It's by osmosis when you grow up with it, but all the ideas and things that I was gravitating towards had to do with like mystery and crime and this forensic procedural world. And I found, oh wait, I guess I do know. I guess I know about this. But I'll tell you what I decided to do. I'm like, okay, I know about this, but forensics is a huge field. And also at the same time, as a writer, I'm sure other writers have said this too, like you really have to do something to set yourself apart, because there's tons of us out there and it's not enough to be a great writer.
Mm-hmm.
You have to set yourself apart by who are you? Like, what's your brand? And it became evident to me that this was what I knew, and this was what was setting me apart. So I went back to school.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the Los Angeles Forensic Science Academy about 10 or well, I think it's more like 12 years ago now, because I wanted to learn more and I wanted to really be more fluent in forensics, I guess, and had changed, things are constantly developing and changing. Mm-hmm. And this book, to graduate, this book was a result of just graduation. Like I needed to produce a project in order to graduate. And I was the only person in this class of 50 who was a writer. Everybody else were like cops or,
Mm-hmm.
Going into biology or that, into actually practicing in the field of forensics. And I was just, not just, but I was doing it for academics. And so our professor, I asked, could I just create this handbook for writers where it's kind of like a forensic boot camp, because I couldn't really find anything like that out there.
Mm-hmm.
That was very succinct and yet thorough, but yet easy to grasp. And so they said, yeah, do it. So the book was actually a result of my friends pushed me to publish it. I contacted Michael Weesey when they were having like a call for submissions for ideas for books. And one of my friends sent me the link and she's like, you need to publish that book. And I'm like, no, I'm not. It's no. And she's like, just do it. I'm like, fine. So I wrote an email and 30 minutes later, they're like, we love this. Let's talk.
So give us some highlights. What are some highlights from the book? Just some practical tips that can help writers.
Okay. So it is a forensic boot camp in a book. So it covers the 8 major branches of forensic science. So like there's a whole chapter on DNA. So really just going down to the basics, like what is DNA? How is it collected? What can we get from it? What can't we get from it? Where do we find it? How do you process it? How long does it take to process? There's a whole book on blood spatter. So not splatter, but spatter. So what kinds of spatter are there? What are the patterns they make? If it makes this pattern, is it low, high, or medium velocity? Does that mean, the suspect was running or walking
and you're saying splatter, you're saying splatter and spatter. So we're as sort of the layman, we say it wrong. We say blood splatter as if it's splattered, but it's actually wrong. You're saying.
Right. So it's really just semantics. Like splatter is a verb. So like but spatter is the noun.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So there you go. Yeah. We got one tip right there. What are some big mistakes that you see writers do over and over again? Are there some things that you see in TV shows all the time? You think, they got this wrong again. Maybe there's some highlights of mistakes that you notice.
It's so funny. I actually teach a whole class on this, but in the end, there's very good. There's mistakes they make, but there's very good reasons for it. So I don't want to disparage our industry, because there are reasons why we have to do certain things. Like one of the biggest things, misnomers or mistakes or faux pas, I guess, is time crunching, right? So they go to the scene and they get this little sample of a hair and they run it to the lab, and 5 minutes later you have results. It's a misnomer. That's not how it works. It takes weeks and weeks and weeks. And sometimes you can't get things off of, the samples are degraded or there's not enough. So there's all kinds of things that get wrong, but there's good reasons for them. We can't have a crime, take 8 weeks when we're watching TV shows.
Yeah. Huh. So where do you draw the line on that? Entertaining versus, being factually correct. Just what's your own philosophy in your own writing?
Yeah, my philosophy is research, because truth is much stranger and more interesting than fiction. And often you will find a workaround. Like if you're trying to cheat it or you're just being lazy, which we've all been there, right? But actually just taking a few extra moments or extra time to really research something I have found 10 times out of 10 gives me something way more interesting for my story than I ever even dreamed possible.
Mhm.
So just bite the bullet, take the extra step, research.
Yeah. Now, as someone who's an expert at this, how do you know if you're going too far, like past what the layman is speaking of? And I give you an example from Aaron Sorkin's Social Network. I've done a lot of programming in my time, and so there were moments in that movie where they start talking about the programming. And number one, it was clear to me as a programmer they don't really know what they're talking about. But again, just exactly what you're saying. I think there's some good. I mean, obviously, Aaron Sorkin is a brilliant writer, so I think there's some good reason for what he did. He simplified it in a way. And so I often, the experts in the field, we're not necessarily making these programs for experts in the field. And if you are an expert, sometimes you just will be taken out of the movie. But where do you sort of draw the line with that, pushing further into the truth? And, you're such an expert, things that frankly, probably most people wouldn't even be interested in.
I mean, a couple things, because I'm a total science nerd too. So like I can go really way too deep. So sometimes my writers group will tell me, you don't need this, we don't even know what you're talking about. You need to simplify this. Or my editors, because I write novels as well. So sometimes I'll get the feedback from other readers, I'll say, wait. The other kind of, not a cheat, but the other helper, I guess I try to do is if I feel like I'm getting too technical, or I really want to get technical, because sometimes there's good reasons to get technical. You need to have like another character you need to have that character work it through. So like if the person who's talking about something really technical, that person needs to be challenged by another character to explain it. So they really, I guess, in a sense, represent the audience at that point.
Yeah.
So if you do want to go technical, which I think is kind of cool sometimes, and sometimes necessary, and it also makes your investigator look really smart, but then you just need to have that other entity, that character who's representing us, who may not know what they're talking about.
Yeah. So obviously your book is a great resource for this. But what other resource exists? And I'm curious, like if as a writer, if I reach out to like an actual policeman or a retired policeman, what have you found in terms of just the reception, approaching people in the crime, law enforcement, and asking questions, telling them I'm a writer? How do you approach people, and what have you found the reception talking to people like that?
I 100% endorse it, especially the retired ones. And I have found very warm reception. I have found even people coming to me saying, if you need anything, or, hey, keep me in mind. Especially the retirees love to talk about what they've done. And I think it's kind of cool. We kind of owe them that in a sense too. Like, tell me your stories. Like, you lived this life. You're the wise one here. Let's hear about it. So I've found really good reception. And I think to some of the more interesting things that I've gotten from my stories have come from actually talking to a person who worked in that field, rather than, just going on Google and researching it or picking up a book. There's some tons and tons of great resources out there. Some of them are a little more technical. Some of them are a little more less technical.
Any tips on how to find these retired law enforcement people? Can you go on Facebook and somehow search groups? What are some tips on that?
I always say, like, start with your community around you. I mean, I can't throw a stone and not hit a fireman or a police officer, or a lot of times, I'm sure there's somebody in your community, even if it's once or twice removed, that knows someone. Your city might have a community liaison who works for the police. A lot of times that happens, or even like in LA, I believe the coroner's office has a person like this too. They're a liaison to the people. Okay. And it's almost like a PR department.
Yeah.
And that's a good place to start. There is an online resource, Crime Scene IO. I think it's got a weird name, but it's one of those groups that you can join, a community, and it's any question people have about anything in this world. So there's tons of experts that are a part of this, and that's a nice kind of very quick online resource of people who are experts, and the writer. It's built for writers. Gotcha. And I can give you that address
Yeah, yeah.
later.
Well, I'll email you follow up. Yeah, we'll get that for the
Yeah,
show notes for sure. But that sounds like a great tip. So, are
it
there some
is.
examples out there of movies or TV shows that you've seen over the last year or two that are really do this well? They do the forensics really, really well. Just some good screenwriting examples you could recommend to our audience.
Okay. So this is going to sound super nerdy, but I've been watching this French show called Balthazar. Now it is in French, but he's a medical examiner in Paris. And I think I've really enjoyed watching the authenticity. Well, it's a very interesting show, but the authenticity of how he, and the variety of cases too. So I think that's a really cool show. And they're a little more authentic in their practices and techniques and equipment than we are here in the US. Like it just, oh yeah, that's what a morgue should look like, not all glossy and everything. So I really have been enjoying that one. There's I don't know, I'm stuck on these French shows right now, but there's another one called Candice Renoir, which is she's a mom of 4 and she's a police detective in a smaller French town, but they do a really great job too of it has a little more comedy to it. It's not a comedy, but it has a little more lightness to it. And they do an amazing job of how a crime, following trails of evidence, which is really, when we're writing these things, that's like foundational. You have to figure out your case file, your trails of evidence. And that show does a great job. If you just were to jot down all the trails of evidence and suspects and things that they follow, it's a really good learning tool, I think. Okay, even perfect. If you don't speak French, there's subtitles.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, those are great recommendations. So just to wrap up, maybe you can just kind of tell us how people can find out what you're doing and where you're at. Twitter, Facebook, a blog, anything you're comfortable sharing. I will also wrap that into the show notes.
The hub is jenniferdornbush.com, and that's sort of the hub. You can sign up for my newsletter there, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and all that's on the website.
Perfect. I will round that up for the show notes. How can people find your book? Where is your book available?
Everything on Amazon.
Gotcha.
They're everywhere, wherever books are sold. But yeah,
perfect. Well, Jennifer, I really appreciate you coming on and talking with me today. Good luck with this book and all your future projects.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll talk to you later. Bye. A quick plug for the SYS Screenwriting Analysis Service. It's a really economical way to get a high-quality professional evaluation on your screenplay. When you buy our 3-pack, you get evaluations at just $67 per script for feature films and just $55 for teleplays. All the readers have professional experience reading for studios, production companies, contests, and agencies. You can read a short bio on each reader on our website, and you can pick the reader who you think is the best fit for your script. Turnaround time is usually just a few days, but rarely more than a week. The readers will evaluate your script on 6 key factors: concept, character, structure, marketability, tone, and overall craft, which includes formatting, spelling, and grammar. Every script will get a grade of pass, consider, or recommend, which should help you roughly understand where your script might rank if you were to submit it to a production company or agency. We can provide an analysis on features or television scripts. We also do proofreading without any analysis. We will also look at a treatment or outline and give you the same analysis on it. So if you're looking to vet some of your project ideas, this is a great way to do it. We will also write your logline and synopsis for you. You can add this logline and synopsis writing service to an analysis, or you can simply purchase this service as a standalone product. As a bonus, if your screenplay gets a recommend or a consider from one of our readers, you get to list the screenplay in the SYS Select database, which is a database for producers to find screenplays and a big part of our SYS Select program. Producers are in the database searching for material on a daily basis, so it's another great way to get your material in front of them. As a further bonus, if your script gets a recommend from one of our readers, your screenplay will get included in our monthly Best Of newsletter. Each month we send out a newsletter that highlights the best screenplays that have come through our script analysis service. This is a monthly newsletter that goes out to our list of over 400 producers who are actively looking for material. So again, this is another great way to get your material out there. So if you want a professional evaluation of your screenplay at a very reasonable price, check out www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing Tim Sutton, who just did a rock and roll drama called Taurus, starring Colson Baker, aka Machine Gun Kelly. We talk about how this movie came together for him, as well as his career, and how he got his start making these sort of very moody, very tone drama films. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. That's the show. Thank you for listening.